Hi, this is Pastor Steve with an update in the life of St. Mark United Methodist Church. As most of you may be aware by now, our Bishop, Bishop Holston, has lifted the restrictions and limitations on church's ability to gather together starting June 10th, which means the first Sunday we might gather together in some form is June 14th. If you're like me, you're excited about that, but also realize that it's going to be a little bit different when we gather together again on June 14th. We at St. Mark are looking at a process, phases, toward our re-entry into the life of the church, sharing worship and other activities and ministries together. I use the word re-entry instead of reopening because our buildings may have been closed, but the church has always been open. The church has been open for over 2,000 some years, never closed because of world wars or pandemics, diseases, or persecutions. We are the church and have been and always will be, whether we're gathered together or are scattered or sequestered. And so St. Mark United Methodist Church has been open, but now we've been given permission to re-enter the places and spaces and activities that identify us in many ways as a church, particularly worship. I mentioned we're going to be doing this in phases. It's going to be a process. We're not going to go from being sheltered and housed in isolation to large gatherings of people together in worship. You know, at each one of our campuses, we're going to make sure we do the things that are necessary and helpful to care for one another and to make it a safe place for us to be. Now, the worship committee is looking at this, ways to do this. The trustees are, of course, involved because there are procedures, cleansing, sanitizing that needs to take place. Of course, our church council oversees everything, and your pastors have been talking about this for a while. We're trying to begin to help you know what's going to happen and kind of a sense of the direction things are going to be taking. Our first phase looks like it'll just be an outside worship services. We know that's somewhat weather dependent, but at least people can self-isolate. They can sit together as a family or in twos or however they choose to, with a good social spacing and free and open air, which makes it safe for everybody. That'll probably take place June 14th at each one of our campuses. We'll do that for a time, a season, until we feel like we're in a position to know we can gather together within our buildings. Now, the re-entry into our buildings is a little more complicated because we'll make sure the air quality is safe, that we can sanitize things, that we're doing the right things, again, to make sure people are safe and you feel cared for, your concerns dealt with or respected as people would choose to come back together again. So that'll be a little bit later in the process. Later on, we'll be adding another phase, which would be Sunday school, Bible study, small groups, and how they might gather together. I hope many of you have been taking advantage of opportunities online, and we'll still be offering those, but yet we know there's a great thing that happens when we gather together. Now, lastly, or some phase down the road, will be the children. We know it's hard for children to keep social distance, hard for them to not want to run up and hug somebody, to be a child with the freedom that represents. And so much later in the process, we'll be intentional about what we do with the children in terms of the ministries and activities that we have for children. Right now in worship, there'd be no children's time because we don't want the children gathering together. We look for families to take care of their children when we're together, to keep the social distancing in place, whether outside or, again, later in the buildings. Again, we're looking for the various things that will help us move from where we are now to where we'd like to be in the future. The day sometime soon, maybe hopefully by the end of the year, when we're gathering together in the larger group, the sanctuary is filled, the praise music going forth, whether from the choir or from the praise bands, and get integrated together in our life as we have been. The part of church for many of us we've been missing. But it's going to take time, and some of you may say, hey, I don't feel like I'm ready to do that. It'll take some time. We saw that from the surveys. Please know we're going to continue our online presence with worship services and devotionals to help you with that. Other of you may feel like, hey, I'm ready to do something, and we'll tell you how to do that. Look particularly in the June newsletter for information about what the beginnings of our process, the phases will look like as we try to move toward June 14th and a worship experience. Know too that the June newsletter also will be sharing some stories of what God has been doing in the life of people in our church are connected through the online experiences, but also through things that God's doing because He's a gracious God. So I'm looking forward to hear some of those stories of what God's been doing in your life or other lives during this time of isolation and sheltering. Again, the church has always been the church and ever will be. And our inability to gather together, and now even as we come together with some of the awkwardness that I'll feel like with masks being on and rubber gloves and distancing, that'll pass. It's just a phase. It's just the first steps. But we got to start somewhere. And we know we can start June 14th. And we as a church are committed to caring for one another, staying close, connected, and hopeful with God, one another, and our community. And the best ways to do that. And we look for that to start June 14th and continue on step by step, phase by phase, following the process, making changes where needed. If something's not working, things can happen a little quicker, we do that as well. But again, looking toward the day when we can be a church gathered together freely and openly and collectively across all our different campuses and all our different worship services to enjoy and celebrate the gracious God who loves us and has kept us during these days and every day. So we're looking forward to June 14th. Look in your newsletter for information. We'll be doing some videos and things as well. And know that we are praying for you. And hope you'll keep praying for St. Mark. God has a lot of things He's doing and will do in the life of our church and His church throughout the world. Thanks be to God indeed.